As we approach the closing stages of the London Chess Classic 2017, the games are certainly hotting up. In round 7, there were 3 decisive games, and my pick of them is Jan Nepomniachtchi against Viswanathan Anand. So Nepo with the white pieces, and his opening strategy was, well, it rather reminded me of Karyakin's game against Anand from the candidates in 2016, where Karyakin also played a kind of English and fianchettoed the queen's bishop at an early stage and got in a very quick h4. Well, here Nepo played g4. There's often a hint of diablerie about Nepo's play, and I think we're really seeing it with this move. He's clearly intending just to to shake up Vishy here. Vishy likes clarity, and we're getting already quite a messy position on the board, which certainly suits Nepo, but doesn't suit Anand so well. So what do you do about this pawn? Well, do you really allow it to advance? In that case, you'd have to protect this pawn. c6 doesn't look very pleasant. So Vishy decided to take it, but of course that opens up the g-file. Could take on d5 straight away, but Nepo prefers to play rook g1, and you can see where the bishop and the rook intercept, already very dangerous. Now if the knight drops back, then of course white recaptures the pawn, and well, you could play like this, but Vishy preferred to play f5, and I think the reason he does that is that there's better connection along the 7th rank, and the pawn on f5 also controls some squares in the centre as well. The downside of f5 is that this diagonal is opened. Nepo recaptures the pawn, and Anand closes the position with e5, probably a very sensible policy, so trying to lock this one out of the game, because it's clear the g-file it's going to open, so h3, and the knight goes back. So even material still, but a very unbalanced position. Semi-open g-file. Anand has some security in the centre. He's kind of survived attack wave 1. But it's very interesting how Nepo plays this now. He plays knight g5, so looking to get in on that, well, arguably weakened square on e6, and also frees the f3 square for the queen. Now, I like this. I'm always saying, if you want to attack your opponent's king, then you need to get your queen in the zone. So Anand already has to be a little bit careful. If the queen is pushed, then it's just going to nudge back to g2, and that already looks a little bit unpleasant, sort of misfired with the bishop. King h8 from Anand. Well, a very natural move to step out of the g-file. And, well, there are various ways one could play this, but Nepo seizes the initiative with knight e6 straight away, so not messing around. Of course, that knight has to be eliminated. And if knight c6, then the f-pawn is on prise, so queen takes pawn. And queen takes b7. So the queen going on a bit of an adventure, but it can come back very easily. And you have to think of the benefits for white of that trade is that now that the light squared bishop has disappeared from the board, then, well, this one turns into a very strong piece, and, well, having damaged those pawns on the queen side, that's, in the long term, could be quite beneficial to white. And the queen isn't going to hang around on b7, comes all the way back to g2, and has some pressure on the g7 pawn. White is certainly for choice here, but it's a very complicated position. Anand likes his knights, but, well, the knight on f6 is fine, but knight on b6, not beautifully placed. It doesn't really have any prospects from there. But of course he did want to kick back the bishop. And these bishops are just waiting in the wings. Very nice. I love the bishop pair. So what does Anand do here? Well, it's not a beautiful position, but this isolated pawn, he advances. If he can play a4, then he certainly has counterplay. So this bishop moved back along the diagonal again, preventing a4. And it's on a safe square here. Rook d8. Well, if it's possible that one day d2 will be a slight weakness, so the rook at least comes to the d file, and maybe one could play bishop a3 here at some point. Well, you have to make sure g7 is protected first, of course. So now Nepo takes the initiative again, just nibbling away at the f-pawn, so g6, and now the queen has some nice squares around the king. And it's a bit uncomfortable for black when this bishop is opposite the king. Vishy would very much like to trade those bishops off, but it's not so easy at the moment. Of course, rook takes g6 now threatened. It's an unpleasant position for black. Knight g8. Although, if you run this position by a chess engine, it actually thinks black is fine here, but in practice, not so much fun to play. Of course, the ending would be pleasant for white. Nice centre pawns, king in the middle, superior pawn structure, and two bishops. Somewhat better for white. Anand repeats the position. So, yeah, Nepo, I think, could have had a draw if he wanted to with queen h6. Vishy kind of offering a repetition, but Nepo plays on. Rook d1. It's a good move. So, as I said, d2 is a slightly sensitive point, and it means that if bishop a3, then you can preserve the bishop on the long diagonal. And here, well, queen e6 looks like a sensible move, and as I said, engines think that black is all right in this position, but in practice, white is certainly for choice there, easier for white to play. But Vishy, as I said before, Vishy likes clarity. He wants a clear plan, and he wants to neutralise his opponent's pieces. He wants to neutralise this bishop on b2, and maybe he's concerned that d4 will come one day. So Vishy played e4, and the idea is to play bishop e5 and neutralise the bishop on b2. Well, fair enough, but that does actually create some weaknesses, which we're about to see. Queen h6, this move again, threatening rook g6, and now, of course, knight g8, impossible because of the bishop on b2. So rook g8 now, defending g6, and here we see the drawback of playing e4. The knight is about to switch to this lovely square f4, looking at g6. Anand, of course, has to neutralise the bishop on b2. So that's a positive from black's viewpoint, but now the knight comes in. Very interesting move, because Nepo leaves the bishop on b5 on prise. So this is a critical variation. What happens? So knight takes g6, takes, forced continuation, knight threatened, mate threatened. Only one move, rook g8. So if rook takes knight, then rook g1 mate. So white trades. So we have a material balance of queen and rook against queen and two knights, and white has an extra pawn. But that queen is so strong in the middle of the board, and black's king a little bit exposed, and these pawns a bit ragged. White definitely has the better chances there. Normally two knights could match a rook, but those knights not on very good squares, so white better there. So Vishy, instead of taking the bishop, decides to play g5. That looks like a very reckless move, giving away the pawn, but there is a bit of counterplay. potential ideas to check down here. And in fact, once again, the engines are reasonably optimistic about black's chances in this position, even though black is a clear pawn down, because there could be the idea of moving the queen and playing the knight in. But, well, I mean, it's very difficult to understand that at the board. And Anand just played rook g7 in this position, just kind of holding things. But now Nepo takes control. Bishop c4. So that bishop was on prise, so it moves back. And he didn't move back to e2. It means that the king has, well, a relatively safe square on e2. So yeah, if move like knight d7, then king e2 simply, and black, it's difficult for black to get in there, so white has a clear pawn up. So in this position, after bishop c4, Anand exchanged off and played queen b2. Now king e2. This position is almost Zugzwang, actually. Anand played a4. Knight came in. Well, Nepo repeated moves and then played a3. It's a kind of Zugzwang position because the queen has to keep protecting the knight. So yeah, queen a3, queen f6, not good. Rook g8 runs into a very nice idea. You can play rook b1 and, well, the white rook activates, or if queen takes rook, then I hope you've all spotted the very familiar checkmating pattern, and there we go, mate on h6. So you can see how black is running out of options here. If knight g8, then the queen comes to this wonderful square here and takes on f5, and then this one will drop. In fact, black does have a move here, queen back to b6, just waiting for the moment. But after d3, trying to bring the rook into the game, there's no doubt that white has a very clear advantage in this position. He is, after all, a pawn up. But Anand collapsed completely. He played knight e8, allowing the queen to switch across the board. And here Anand resigned. Well, what happens? The knight is on prise, the pawn is on prise. So, for example, knight d6, queen takes a4. That's pawn number 2. White is completely solid, and, well, I think we could say it's a fairly easy task for white to go on and win this game, because black really can't hit against white's king, and white is completely solid. Once the rook comes into the game, then it really is curtains for black. So a convincing victory for Jan Nepomniachtchi, and that means he actually goes into the lead with Fabiano Caruana. So Caruana and Nepomniachtchi have 4.5 points. Magnus Carlsen and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave half a point up behind on 4 points. Both of them won in round 7, Magnus's first win and MVL's first win as well. So with 2 rounds to go, really, it's only those 4 players realistically can win the tournament. Caruana maybe has a slightly easier run in. He has black against Nakamura and white against Adams. Nepomniachtchi has black against Carlsen and white against Vachier-Lagrave. So 2 rounds to go, and it really is wide open.